sauce to attracting top talent, shaping company culture, and contributing to the growth of any business? Well, you better believe it has to do with the recruiters that are behind the scenes and how you are hiring talent. Welcome back to another episode of the Just Get Hired podcast. This is your go-to resource for the latest workplace trends, hiring tips, and all things career related. I'm your host, Jessica Fiesta George, and I've been helping people just like you for the last 2 decades who want to understand how to navigate this challenging job market. And today you're in for a treat because it is the tale of 2 Jessicas. Welcome in Jess Peterson to the Just Get Hired podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So, Jess, but you are a total rock star in the recruitment world. And for the last 15 years or so, you've been in-house, you've been in agency, you've worked in a bunch of different industries from tech to healthcare, hospitality, you name it. And today we're going to talk about why recruiters are the secret sauce behind any organization. And you're here to give us the scoop on what makes recruiting so critical to organizations and how it impacts everything from company culture to attracting talent. And if you're in HR, talent acquisition, or you're just curious how companies want to find the right people, you're in for a treat because Jess is going to bless us with her knowledge on this topic. And so are you ready to turn up the heat and share the critical role recruiters play in an organization?
I'm ready for all the spicy tips, Jessica,
Awesome.
for sure.
Spicy. I love it. All right. Well, let's get into your recruiting background. So I want to set things up and introduce you properly. What led you to pursue a career in recruiting? Share some key milestones in your career that shaped your perspective on recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recruiting is kind of like sales where no one goes to school. No one's like, I want to be a recruiter when I woke up or when I grow up. So I fell into it like a lot of recruiters. I had someone who reached out and he's like, I have this opening for a recruiter job. And I'm like, okay. And the only recruiting role I'd ever known about it was military recruiting. And that was not the right fit for me. But recruiting was. And when he, talked a little bit about it, he said, we're helping make dreams come true. And that was my aha moment. That was what got me into recruiting. I've been in it, for at least 15 years. And I think that the best thing about it is obviously the offer piece. Nothing's better than extending an offer or telling a hiring leader, hey, great news, your top candidate accepted. But also, I enjoy the educational piece, the education of the process, the education about companies, and just talking to people and letting them know that there are other opportunities out there. Because when you're getting a job, you get stuck sometimes because it's the fear of the unknown. And when you have someone on the other end who's like, hey, let's have a chat, let's talk about your background, it's freeing because the recruiter's done half of the work. All the person on the other end has to pick up the phone, and then the magic happens. So I don't know, I've done a little bit of everything, and I can't say that I love one thing more than the other than actually helping people get jobs.
Well, I think that's why I also love this role, because we're the fun side of HR. No one likes to get a call from your HR manager to come to the office because either you're in trouble or something happened or they have a lot of questions. But when you know that you're getting a call from a recruiter, it's typically good news that either, you've got an interview or you have a job offer. And that's why I love this side of HR, not necessarily the other side.
Yeah, the other definitely has its place, but I think that's one of the interesting things is that you do have to realize that the HR function is different than talent acquisition, and it's a different skill set from bringing talent in top of funnel or hiring people. And then once the job is accepted, then it's up to the HR team to really be responsible for enablement and making sure that the candidate stays with the company long term. But they won't actually get into the company without a recruiter actually talking, engaging, and being that salesperson into who the company is, what the role is, and then setting the stage for the cultural expectations.
So we are the secret sauce. And before we get any further into the conversation, I do want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, the Spicy Gnome Hot Sauce. That's why we're playing on this hot sauce theme. But these guys have been my secret ingredient for creating some of the best episodes that I had last summer. And this time they are here to sponsor not only this episode, but my upcoming summer series. We're calling it the secret sauce of careers. So if you haven't tried the spicy gnome yet, you're missing out. So trust me, one drop can kickstart your taste buds. It will kickstart your career. I'll pop the links in the show notes so that you can grab a bottle and spice up your career and your life. So visit the spicygnome.com, check it out. They have a growing lineup of hot sauce available. So I want to say thank you to the Spicy Gnome for supporting this podcast. So let's focus in even more on this topic. So you hit on a lot of things when it comes to the recruiters and how they are mission critical when it comes to organizational success. And you mentioned also like company culture. It's up to HR and the managers to kind of build that once they get a hire into the organization. But how can recruiters contribute to shaping a company's culture and that long-term success? How do we influence diversity and inclusion?
That's a really great question. I think DEI and that space is really evolving because it's a relatively new concept, which is kind of funny to be like, oh, we want to have a diverse workforce because chances are our clientele, our customers are diverse, and it's better to have someone who looks like me, sounds like me, has the same background. There's that relatability component. So I think that one of the ways that recruiting can really be very efficient from a DEI perspective is putting diverse talent in front of hiring leaders. Like the hiring leaders don't know who's available without recruiting. The other piece of it is knowing the different mentality shifts and things around how certain demographics approach open jobs. I mean, we've all heard the theory that women only apply to jobs if they meet 100% and men apply for 60%. I don't know if that's really true, but I do know that it's a different conversation when I'm having a conversation with talent, depending on where they are in their life or what they are looking for. And at the end of the day, if you don't look for diverse talent, you're not going to find it. So it's really being methodical and putting together a solid top of funnel function to find out where is that diverse talent hiding? How can you increase that visibility? Because the more people that the hiring leader sees from a diverse slate, the more opportunity they have of making a diverse hire.
Okay.
So.
Well, I was peeking at your LinkedIn profile and you say that you have a superpower, and that is that you're a data-driven storyteller. So I want to kind of explore that. What does that mean when it comes to recruiting? And what is that superpower?
I've been in the business long enough, and I like to be an agent of change. And sometimes that means dropping a bomb in the conversation with my hiring leader and saying in the nicest way possible, like, what you want is not realistic, or what you want is not going to allow you to meet your deliverable requirements because of A, B, and C. And yes, I have enough experience. I can say my gut says that, but no one's going to really say, oh, well, that's great. Jess says that, like, that's not realistic. So being a data-driven storyteller is showing data that explains this is what your criteria is. And the criteria is usually neither good or bad, it just is. But explaining how the various pieces of that criteria impacts time to fill, and it impacts all the different components about finding talent. And you have to tell the story, because if I just present facts, like, no one cares. So it's really making sure that it's digestible, it's understandable, and it's backed up by data to say, look,
Right.
this is what the data says, and take it or leave it, but it is what it is. Like, this is data, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Numbers don't lie, right? So
Right.
if you can show them the numbers, then there's no hiding or making stories up about it. They are what
Right.
they are.
Right. And, sometimes hiring leaders have said, thank you so much. How do you recommend changing it? And then I usually have a laundry list of ways to modify or tweak it. And then I've also had hiring leaders who said, thanks so much. We're going to continue doing it our way. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And then we make it work. But is it easier sometimes to go based on what the data says? Absolutely. But also other times you don't have that flexibility. There are other constraints that don't allow you to flex on requirements or location or things like that. So you just got to kind of figure out what is going to work, and then just make sure they know the end result or consequences.
So the hot topic is always, how can we hire people into these open roles that we have? You always see hiring managers like scrambling to find talent. Everyone's always in a hurry, but and I know there's a process behind all of that. Have you found any innovative techniques to help improve recruiting outcomes with the companies that you've worked with?
It's going to sound really simple, but it's one of the things that when I coach or mentor recruiters is build a bench. At all possible, build a bench. I am somewhat surprised sometimes when recruiters are like, oh, fill that job, and then they throw it over their shoulder, even though the hiring leader said, we have 3 more roles coming in this quarter, or it's a role that you constantly hire on. And I've always felt like if you're already in that space, even if you don't have that exact role, but you have a role above or a role below, build a bench. Go through that ATS, go through the rec and say, hey, here's 20 people that didn't make it this round. Maybe they applied too late, or they just weren't the right fit, but they have an interesting background. And then engage them and say, hey, this role filled. I anticipate other ones. Are you open to having a phone call and starting that relationship? And that also helps from a diversity perspective, because, certain people and, me personally, like, it takes me a while to get back to someone if I'm not actually looking. But I appreciate someone who's going to be like, hey, still want to talk to you. Hey, are you available? Let's just have a chat. So I think that's really the secret sauce, the spicy tip, whatever you want to call it. One of the easiest ways is to build a bench, because then when you build the bench, you have to maintain it. Like, if you don't talk to them in 6 months and show back up, that's a cold bench, so you need to figure out a way to stay in touch with them. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be like hey, how are you going? How's your job search? Are you still in the market? And that's fine, just so that when you pick up the phone and say, hey, great news, I have a job, they're like, who are you? What company? Like, that is the worst thing to happen, because then you're starting all over.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned earlier, recruiting is like sales. So to me, it's like building your portfolio and your just building your sales leads, because if you don't have the bench available, it's hard for you to tap into other markets. And then when different roles come up, at least you've already started those conversations. So I know you're onto something there, and you're right. A lot of recruiters don't take time to take that extra step. And if they do, I think they will find that they'll close a lot more jobs, and hiring managers will be happier because we're getting it filled even quicker.
Right. Or it'll give them the opportunity, if you have the bench for the roles that are consistent or easy to fill, it really allows you to focus on the roles that are more difficult, that are going to take longer to fill, because you're like, I have my list of 20 people. Let me just reach out to them. I talked to them last week, and then send them over. So that's the other piece, is prioritizing, because you can actually increase your time to fill across the board, because you're spending time where you need to. That's a difficult search or an unusual search versus something that should be relatively easy.
Absolutely. And I've talked about this before, the hidden job market. That's where a lot of opportunities come up, is just through your conversations you've had already with people. They don't necessarily have to advertise. Usually they have to advertise just for legal purposes, but
Mhm.
for the most part, they already have a few people in mind when it comes to a certain role before it's actually advertised, because you've already started those conversations weeks, days, months ahead of time.
Right.
So recruiting is not just post and pray. I know a lot of companies think that we don't need recruiters because I can just post it on LinkedIn. I can post it on Indeed, and applications will start flowing through. So what do you think about that statement,
Oh,
that you
that
can just post and pray? Like, I don't believe, like a lot of people, when you say, we don't need recruiters, we know how to post jobs on Indeed. It's not just about that, right? So how do you feel about when you hear people say they don't need recruiting?
I think that a lot gets lost in the actual day-to-day, because if a business is hiring for a role, that's a whole. And if you don't have a recruiter to at least do that minimum qualification, make sure you're aligned in location, skill set, who is that hiring leader going to have on their team to do that? Are they going to have themselves? Are they going to have a junior person who has no idea or doesn't want to actually talk to anyone outside of the company? How are they going to sell them on the job? How are they going to be able to know what questions? Because not only do you ask questions to get the understanding of where the candidate is, what they're looking for, sell the company, there's a lot of questions that you cannot ask. And it's getting more and more specific around compensation, legal questions, illegal questions to ask, that I have a hard time keeping up. And this is my day to day. And
Mm-hmm.
I unfortunately have been on more calls than I'd like. And I'm like, oh my God, hiring leader, I cannot believe you just asked that. That is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And a lot of times
Oh,
that's
yeah.
people that know they shouldn't ask these questions, but against their better judgment, just pops out. And I think that's the other piece of recruiting, is that not only can we find you talent, but we can keep you from doing things that could get you fired, could get you sued. I mean, the laundry list goes on, and we can also help keep you productive. One of the things that I go back and forth with is the importance of intake calls. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had people say, oh, I don't do intake calls. I fill this role 25 times. And I'm like, but you should still have a call with your hiring leader to find out what's changed. And it's a great opportunity to go back through your bench and say, hey, do you remember Jane? You talked to her three months ago. She didn't have X, and she didn't have X, but now you're hiring for X. Why don't we revisit her? And all of a
Yeah.
sudden your search goes to a couple days, maybe because Jane's the right fit. So that's the other thing, that the best practice, or why they need recruiting, is hiring leaders don't have time to keep up with all the people that they have talked to.
That's true. That is true. And, I think we should probably have a podcast episode on questions that managers should not ask, because people don't realize the illegal questions that they're asking. Something simple like, where did you go to school? Or, what church do you go to? Like, oh God,
Right.
it's
Right.
cringy when you hear that, but it sounds like to them a conversation that just happens normally. But those are things that we know you're not supposed to ask those questions, but managers think that it's okay. So in essence, we kind of are those gatekeepers for,
Mhm.
Letting mistakes seep through. So
Yeah.
that is why we're, I think, really critical to organizations, on top of a number of other things. But while we have a few minutes, what are some quick tips that you might have for businesses who are considering either hiring recruiters, or even if they need a recruiting department?
I think that on the face of it, recruiters don't make you money. You cannot say recruiters made this much money for me per quarter. But a recruiter can help save you money from the standpoint of making sure you have the right hire. A lot of my work has been in the revenue space, and if there's not a seller, then
Mhm.
that territory doesn't get covered. And the longer that territory doesn't get covered, the less money comes in from that territory that the other salespeople or the other managers have to come up with. So from that perspective, we can help generate income long term. So I think that also recruiting, there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of like busy work that
Yeah.
if I'm working with the director of IT, for example, I would not want them to spend the time doing what I do 80% of the time. I mean, it just doesn't make sense because it's not their job to find people. Their job is to be the director of IT or whatever. So it's just a lot to ask someone to do something they're not equipped for.
You do you, and we'll do us.
Right, right. We can partner and make sure that you get the right people in at the right time. But like I always say, recruiting should be, the hiring team should spend 10% of their day or their life working on that role, from prepping for interviews, for intake calls, for weekly updates. But that's it. Like, and I think that good recruiters make the
Mhm.
recruiting job look easy. It's because we hand the hiring leader 5 fantastic candidates and say, pick one of the 5. At least three of them can do the job that you want. So it makes it look easier than it is without
Right.
seeing all the like stuff beforehand.
Yeah, they don't know the 100 of applications that you had to go through to find the top 5, or
Mm-hmm.
all of the phone calls and all of the people who ghost you or waste your time during a phone call, or the ones that, you take in like 30 minutes to an hour out of your day just to find those gems out of the stack of applications. They don't really get to see all of that. So
No.
that is why we're valuable. One of the
Yes,
reasons
for
why we're
sure.
valuable, I would say. All right. Well, if you have anything else you want to share with the audience?
No, I mean, I think that there's a lot of buzz out there. There's a lot of information, misinformation, the good and bad of social media. The only thing I can say is look at the source. So there's a lot
Okay.
of really great recruiters that are putting out a ton of really great content. You put out fantastic content. Just be really mindful that all information is not good information and all information is not truthful. So just buyer beware. I think we are at that point of buyer beware from a tips, tricks, spicy takes, all of that in the recruiting space.
Everyone's an expert these days.
They are,
Or
and
so it seems. But
yeah,
we'll leave that there.
some should
Well,
really not quit their like day job because
thank you. Not to be named on this podcast, but I would appreciate you, Jess, for being a guest on the show. If you enjoyed conversations just like this, make sure you click that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Head over to justgethired.com. I'll have links to all of the great resources and how you can also get in touch with Jess if you want to connect with her on LinkedIn. But make sure that you rate this episode, leave a review. It really does help us out in order for us to grow the show. Again, thank you to the Spicy Gnome for sponsoring this episode. And don't forget to follow at Just Get Hired on all of your favorite social media channels. My name's Jessica Fiesta George. That was Jess. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on my next episode.